Chris Landry, hopefully you've had a great week, sir. Welcome into the game in Tuscaloosa.
Great to be with you. I've had a great week, busy week. Can't believe it's mid-February already. And, time moves fast with the free agency upcoming and the draft preparation and everything that involves football and quote-unquote the off-season.
Yeah, and I want to spend some time because I kind of like this time of the year. Free agency and some Alabama guys, Combine coming up. I guess Combine, is it next week or the next week? It's
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
In a couple of weeks, yeah.
Okay. And certainly I want to pick your brain about that. But Alabama's going through, obviously, another coaching search. Carl Dunbar going back to the NFL. Mm-hmm. Can you walk us through the hiring process and what is the evaluation when we talk about, because we talked about recruits last week, what is it when you're trying to search and find a coach that will fit what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, first of all, congrats to Carl. He's done a great job. Actually coached Carl at LSU, and really good coach, and it's a great opportunity for him. When you're looking at coaches, there are a number of things that you look for. You look at character, loyalty, which is the coaching reputation, the respect level among the peers in football, not the public perception or the media perception, but truly what a guy is as a football coach. Background, the experience, the achievement level to this point. Associations with success helps, but not a necessity, because sometimes you get really good coaches and they're not in great situations. Everybody starts somewhere. Then you're looking at kind of the ability to teach, to communicate, to develop players' technical skills. That's the knowledge of the position techniques, the use of players within scheme concepts, the ability to motivate and get the most out of a player. Technical ability, the ability to design and implement systems as regards to coaching your position. Teaching. Teaching is the ability to translate the knowledge from a technical sense onto the practice field where you can creatively get your point across in various manners to help players understand thoroughly, quickly. Motivation's a part of that. We've all been around good teachers and average teachers, and sometimes you had teachers in college or high school, wherever, that really knew their subject, but they weren't great teachers. You got to be able to communicate that. The ability to identify talent and to work within a current system that's being taught of how we're going to evaluate the critical factors at each position. So the ability to do that. And then, of course, the recruiting part of it is I'm not going in any order, but the recruiting part is the most important part. The ability to be able to recruit at this level, and the sales part of recruiting is the second phase of recruiting. After you identify who you're going to recruit, the ability to, from a work ethic standpoint, and to be able to communicate, really important. And then, just being overall the program team management, budgeting of time. I think the biggest thing for an Alabama potential staff member is what's a guy's ability to learn and work ethic. Because unlike other schools where you're looking for somebody who's the best defensive line coach, who's the best secondary coach, who's the best running back coach, that's not as important at Alabama as it is at other programs. What's most important is who are the most trainable. Give me the guy that's the hungriest, that has great work ethic, and is very smart, that can learn, because they have a system in place that they're going to be able to teach people how to do it. We're not, concerned necessarily about we're going to do things a different way. They're always open to ways to make it better, but in order to make it better, you got to understand what we do and why we do it and why it's worked. And if you can add to that, great. But those things are a little bit more important as opposed to, say, where, I'm talking to you from Baton Rouge, where you got a guy like an Ed Orgeron, he's got to hire guys on his staff that can cover up, quite frankly, some of his inability as a coach, that, he's not someone that's great at teaching coaches. So they've got to go out and hire the best of the best, and that's why they're paying a coordinator $2.5 million a year, almost as much as they're paying the head coach, because the defense coordinator is probably as important, if not more important, than the head coach, and they didn't want to lose him. That's not the case at Alabama. So there's a little bit of difference when what they're looking for than maybe what some other programs are looking for at Alabama.
We're talking to Chris Landry, LandryFootball.com. Let's make our way here to Tuscaloosa just for a couple of minutes. Tosh Lupoi is going to be the new defensive coordinator at the University of Alabama. He's never called plays before. How much of a risk take is that from Coach Saban?
Well, there's always a first time calling plays and first time in that situation. Tosh is a perfect example of a young coach that's been trained very well. Pretty obvious that of the other candidates, again, Nick could have gone out and because of the program's success, could have gone out and hired somebody with, more experience, have called plays for years and years. But, those type of guys want to come in and I want to run my system. I want to do that. Well, that's not what you're going to be asked to do. Whether it's Kirby Smart, whether it's Jeremy Pruitt, those guys have been trained under a system, trained how to call it. Now, being able to evaluate Tosh in his ability to be able to assemble that information and under pressure, be able to make those type of calls and adjustments during the course of the game is something that you have to evaluate as a coach while you are around him. And while there's a first time for doing it, there are certain qualities that it takes to be able to handle those type of pressures. So for somebody that's never done it, he has to have a pretty good feel that he's capable of doing it, or at the very least is the best option for him to turn to for this position. I think the fact that they've got so many guys that they've, had to replace is a challenge. You mentioned defensive line, the secondary. I mean, you've got a number of issues that when you put a lot of guys in a position of change, then it's going to be a busy off season for Nick staying on top of things, whereas maybe in the past when you have a position coaching change, your coordinator may be able to help some of that. Now that coordinator is going to have his plate full. You've got to help groom him, but you also have to help him help the new position coaches. So it's going to be probably the biggest challenge that Nick has is the fact that you're going to lose coaches year in and year out, and you have to replace them, and it's getting tougher and tougher to do that, particularly when you're rated like they've been rated this year.
Well, let me step back here just for a couple of minutes. Will that job become more difficult because there's so many new faces? I mean, he's the only defensive assistant coach that's returning. So
yes. Does
it make that more of a challenge because you've got so many new faces that not only you're teaching them of what you really want to do?
Yes. It's going to be a lot more challenging. And ideally, if you had, 2-3 position coaching changes, you'd ideally like to have, the coordinator stay or vice versa. It's going to be definitely a big challenge. There's no doubt about it. That you are in a situation there. He's in a situation that's very, very difficult and challenging because, again, you've got the complete side of the ball there. And let's also look at, the offensive side too. It's not like the offensive side needs to be left alone and, the coordinator's returning, haven't been there. So, there's a lot of changes, and there's no question that it may not show up as much in certain games, but in other games, it'll be interesting to see how they're able to transition. It's probably the biggest challenge that he's had, Nick, that is, since, he's got this program rolling at, the championship level year in and year out. It's the biggest upheaval in terms of the staff that he's had to deal with in terms of certain positions at certain times and having to deal with it all at once.
Well, Chris, is it fair to say that Alabama's defense will take a step back? I mean, you look at the talent that they've lost, then you combine this with all these new faces at the assistant coaches. Is it not fair to say that maybe this defense will take a step back?
Well, I think it's going to be more difficult, but that's all relative, isn't it, Ryan? It really depends upon, sometimes you're a better team and your production is not as good. People say, well, you're not as good. Well, not necessarily. You might even be better, but the people that you're playing are better, and you don't show up on the results end of it as being better. In some cases, you're more productive in terms of results, but you're not as good. So I think it will be a challenge, and it will be a step back, no doubt. But what does that really mean? Does it mean that they're still good enough to win the conference? I think it is. I still think they're the best team in the West. I think the only team in the conference that is comparable at this point is Georgia. I know Auburn is capable as well. We saw that last year, and we don't know what's going to happen, in September, much less November, and who's going to be healthy and whatnot. But still, if you're asking me, would they take a step back? Yes, but the step back doesn't mean that I don't expect them to be in the conference championship game and perhaps beyond. I think that's still on pace to be the case.
How much will it be? Because Alabama's offense is expected to really obviously be a point that's going to carry this football team for the first few games of the season. How much will it be an asset to Alabama that the secondary, you look at the secondary, and only 4 defensive starters returning, that Alabama's offense is going to be able to kind of light it up a little bit, to be able to challenge those secondary, because, they're going to face some pretty talented wide receivers, some pretty talented quarterbacks in practice that will prepare them for the upcoming season.
Well, let me say this. I think, and we talked a little bit about this probably the week after the national championship game, and maybe even the second week after. There is definite cause for excitement for Alabama fans to maybe see an offense that maybe from a fan's perspective is going to be more exciting. The term open it up a little bit more. And that's great. And the answer is absolutely it's going to be important. And they may have to score more points. But let me explain that as you, and it gets lost in the championship game, because we all would agree that they don't win that championship game if it's not for Tua coming in and making big plays. But when you break down the game and you do it as we do it professionally, and you're doing it without emotion, there are a lot of mistakes that he made in that game. It could have been costly. He overcame and they won. That's all, forgotten and forgiven. But now let's take that into this next year. Yes, you can score more points and help your defense out more. But one of the reasons why this Alabama defense has been good year in and year out, yes, it's the talent. Yes, it's the coaching. But it's also what? It's an offense that controls the football, that, doesn't require the defense to be on the field for long stretches. And they don't have to be in a lot of, shootout type games. If this offense has to score points and they go a little bit more up-tempo, there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be turnovers. Now, all of a sudden, that hurts the defense. So people think, score a lot of points. Well, again, Alabama usually gets their, big points by the end of 4 quarters when they wear you out. And they do it in a way where your defense is protected. Now, all of a sudden, you score points and you turn the ball over and you're getting into shootout games. I mean, that becomes a problem. There's some offenses in this league and maybe some quarterbacks with inferior overall talent that could maybe play Alabama in a up-and-down shootout type of game. But they can't beat Alabama in a 4-quarter game in which Alabama dominates at the line of scrimmage. So while there is reason to be excited about the offensive productivity being a little different and maybe being more explosive, it will also, there's a correlation. You score a lot of points and you go up-tempo, you're going to give up more points. So I don't know how exciting it may be exciting. I don't know how satisfying it'll be for fans if they're winning games, 35 to 28, and they're going up and down the field, and the defenses are more vulnerable. And that could happen if you look at any other offenses that are really explosive. It's not just that when they say the defenses are not very good. Well, a big part of the reason why the defenses are not very good for those teams is because they're on the field all the time, and they're getting worn down. The toughest thing to do physically is to rush the passer and line up and do it again and again and again. So that's a big part of the success and why Alabama dominates game control, and very few games are in harm's way with Alabama because of their ability to control it defensively. If that changes and they have to be more up-tempo on offense, then they're going to have to be really sharp on offense and not make mistakes, or else they become a team that's just as vulnerable to get beaten as anybody else on a given Saturday. And that's not what Alabama is all about under Nick Saban.
And let me go back to this right here. And this is maybe I don't know if it's a fair question, but I've been told that when you look at Nick Saban as far as the fundamentals, they're not overly complex when we talk about his schemes and everything. He believes in player development. He believes that his guys are better than your guys. Is that fair to say that kind of label?
Yeah, he doesn't throw a ton of stuff at him. He throws a lot of checks and adjustments, and they're very well prepared for that. But what he is a stickler for is positional technique, hand usage, foot placement. If you're supposed to line up with your left foot open 6 inches to the right, it better be 6, not 5.5, not 6.5. There's a reason for it. Proper technique leads the ability to be able to perform and execute a particular coverage in this case, or a particular front, a particular play by a defensive lineman, a linebacker. That is a real stickler for details. He does throw some stuff at his guys, and he requires guys to learn a lot. But in a college system, in a 20-hour work week, you can't do all the things that you want to do schematically that you can do in the NFL. Just you're dealing with younger guys that are less experienced and less time to work on their craft. So he does it, and there's no doubt the formula for Alabama under Nick Saban is the championship formula is we're going to recruit the best players, and we're going to miss less on evaluating players, and we're going to develop the players in every way in the off-season program, conditioning, nutrition, and technique of how we teach each position, and we're going to fundamentally beat you on every game. We're going to play to a standard, not to our opponent. We're going to play every play like it's just a life of its own, and I don't care if we're down 20, up 20, first play, last play. You'll want to do it a certain way because that ingrains a routine, and that leads them to win the majority of their games, and the only people that can beat them is if you just outplay them and you have some dynamics that they don't match up well against. So that is not going to begin to be a factor negatively unless, the recruiting slips a little bit because, and you mentioned it, are they going to be able to coach as well early and get all the little details figured out as well as they've always done? Don't know. Honestly, don't know. With this many, people, I know how he's going to teach it. I know what he's going to demand, but it doesn't mean that there are not going to be more mistakes than there have been in the past when you only have 1 or 2 coaching openings. So all of that is definitely in play, and definitely you're correct that, they try to simplify things and be diligent in their technique, and that's what kind of separates them. And quite frankly, that sounds like coach speak, folks. I do this for a living all the time, and other people don't play with the same type of technique. There are other people that have players that can line up and play, and they go out and make plays, but on a consistent play-in, play-out basis, week in and week out, they do it the best. So, you get this, Alabama wins because they get the best players. Alabama wins because they get the best players, and they coach them fundamentally the best. It has to be both. It absolutely is both. And with one out the other, they're not winning, 2 national championships, much less 5.
We're talking to Chris Landry. It is LandryFootball.com. Football views from a coach, a scout, an administrator. And, Chris, if we could just start, maybe you could explain, because we are a college football, obviously, town, what is the biggest difference between what they call a restricted free agent and an unrestricted free agent?
Well, it has to do with a guy's accredited years in the league. Restricted is just that. You've got a right of first refusal on a player, and there's compensation involved if you sign a restricted free agent. So that's the term restricted. Unrestricted means that you can go out and sign with anyone. So it's pretty obvious why there's some restricted free agents that are intriguing to people. There's a price tag associated with it, so to speak, other than just the paying of the salary. There's a compensation involved. So with the unrestricted free agents, they've got a lot more freedom of movement. So as it relates to a situation like A.J. McCarron, it really comes down being put on the NFI list and whether they were correct in doing so, and that affects an accredited season for him and would determine whether he's a restricted or an unrestricted guy. And we should know here, I thought we might know something today, should know something here in a couple of days, and he would certainly, obviously, going to get a lot more play and going to certainly get signed as an unrestricted free agent. As a restricted guy, still a possibility, but less likely so.
All right, let me ask you, how much of the demand will there be for A.J. McCarron?
A lot of demand because of quarterbacks. It's supply and demand in free agency. There's just not enough of them. Drew Brees is a free agent, but it's not going anywhere. He's going to sign with the Saints. Jimmy Garoppolo's re-upped with the Niners. So you're talking about Kirk Cousins and Case Keenum, Josh McCown. I mean, those are the guys out there. So AJ's going to absolutely get some play. I mean, the other guys would be like a Sam Bradford's a UFA, a Tom Savage. So, if you follow the pro game out there, you know that there are a lot of those guys what we call backup caliber guys, whereas AJ has got the potential to help somebody and be a starter in a certain situation or a few around the league. So I think he's going to get a lot of play. I mean, when I say a lot, there's going to be multiple teams that are interested in him, and I think he'll get a nice payday. And because he's not played a lot, he won't break the bank, but he'll get a really nice payday when he hits the market. It just will depend on if it's this year or next year.
Yeah, when you certainly the work ethic that he's got. Do you see anything in this NFL draft upcoming that you see a franchise quarterback? Do you like these quarterbacks that are in this upcoming draft that you can build something around?
I do. I like a lot of them. I think a lot of them are really good. I'm a little bit concerned about how committed Josh Rosen is to the game, but that's the only thing. He's physically gifted. Sam Darnold is so good, has got so much potential, but he's just so young and raw. It's going to be outstanding. I think Josh Allen has a chance to be pretty good. I'm worried about the accuracy issues. I like Baker Mayfield. I think Mason Rudolph. I think it's a really good year and a number of guys in this draft that can help you.
Chris Landry, LandryFootball.com. The first thing that went through my mind when you were talking about the Nick Saban style and the technique and all that, the first thing that went through my mind, do a lot of coaches try to overthink football and make it too complex?
Oh, I think there's some that do. I think, and now you're in general, or you're specifically talking in college?
Just in general. I mean, I see coaches that are highly intelligent, and it's like maybe they try to make it too fancy. Maybe they try to do too much.
Well, in college, I don't see that. In college, if anything, I'm seeing an oversimplification. In fact, it's becoming so simplified that as we take them into the NFL, as I like to say, the coaching in college is as good as it's ever been, but the players are less prepared than ever before. Because going into the pro game, receivers come into the NFL, they only know how to run two routes. I mean, quarterbacks, for the most part, don't know how to huddle. They don't know how to call a play. Everything is on the sideline. Running back, simply. So it is the blocking scheme's much more simplified. Defensively, it's a lot simpler in college. So there's an oversimplification. Why? You look at what's happening. The freshmen are playing earlier. You got a 20-hour work week. You got to simplify the game at the college level to get them on the field. And in college, it's more about the talent that you have. If you look at it, we can talk about parity all we want. The reality is there's the same handful of teams every year that are playing at the top of college football. And they're the teams that recruit the best programs. They're not 50 teams that are capable of winning the national championship next year, Ryan. They're not. I mean, there's only a few. And so those are the teams with the most talent. So college is more about, hey, you have the most talent, and can you beat those other, let's say, dozen teams that maybe are in the same plateau in terms of talent level. Whereas the NFL, it's a lot different. You can't just free agency is not about getting the best players. Free agency is about getting players that are available that the teams that have them decided they're not going to keep those players. So you're not getting the best players out of free agency. In the draft, you are getting the best players, but you can only draft them, and you can't go and sign them like you do in recruiting. So in the talent level is more evenly dispersed in the NFL than it is in college football. So the best team in the NFL and the worst team in the NFL are a lot closer in terms of talent than the best team in the SEC and a team that is, say, the 10th, 8th, or 9th best team in the SEC. There's a big talent gap. There's not as much of a talent gap in the NFL. So coaching, scheme, quarterback play that can make a difference and kind of turn things around are a huge, huge factor in determining whether a team could come. That's why you see, teams shoot up. The Eagles, 3 years ago looked like the Cleveland Browns look, and they won the Super Bowl this year. The Rams got better, and not so much in a hurry. They were getting, but look how much better they got this year. You're not going to sit there and turn around and see, with all due respect, you're not going to see Kansas in 3 years competing for the national title. It's just not going to happen. So they've got the resources are more even in the NFL, and the rules are favoring the teams that don't do as well to get better. Whereas in college, it's quite the opposite. The programs that are the most successful, make the most money, they can do the things that it's necessary to stay on top, and you're just the best amongst, let's just call it the top 20 programs. The rest of them are really have very little chance to compete on the championship level.
LandryFootball.com. Some great articles, as we always like to highlight the great Tuesday and Thursday podcast. If you're looking for more coverage of the college football game that you love, the recruiting, fantasy, free agency, the NFL draft is going to be a dynamic conversation. The NFL free agency, as we talked about, opening up in just a few days into this month. Recruiting, coaching news, scouting. You can find it all available there, LandryFootball.com. Learn more about gaining exclusive access. Learn what's happening in college football and the NFL from the inside the film room where the decisions are made. LandryFootball.com. Chris, I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks. And Ron, I'd like to mention, too, we've got the breakdown of every college team's recruiting classes, Alabama's, everybody in the SEC around the country. You can get scouting reports on each player. So that's something that's up right there. You just go there and click on recruiting. You'll see, or you can go to the school that you're in.